The morning sun cast long shadows across the flight deck of the USS Theodore Roosevelt as Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos made her way to the ammunition storage compartment deep in the ship's belly. At 26 years old, she had been handling ordnance on aircraft carriers for nearly 8 years, ever since she enlisted straight out of high school in her small Texas hometown. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked her gear, the familiar weight of her tool belt a comfort against her hip. Maria had always been good with her hands. Growing up on her grandfather's ranch, she could fix anything from broken fence posts to stubborn tractor engines. When the Navy recruiter visited her high school, promising technical training and the chance to see the world, she signed up without hesitation. Her family needed the steady income, and the military offered opportunities that her drought-stricken hometown simply couldn't provide. The ammunition compartment was a maze of carefully organized chaos. Rows upon rows of missiles, bombs, and various ordnance lined the walls, each piece tagged, tracked, and secured according to strict protocols. Maria supervised a team of 8 younger sailors, most of them fresh out of technical school and still learning the intricate dance of carrier operations. Safety was everything in her world. One mistake could kill dozens of people and cripple a billion-dollar warship. "Santos, we've got a priority load coming down from the flight deck," called out Seaman Williams, one of her newest team members. "They need a full complement for the morning strike package." Maria nodded, already mentally calculating the time needed to prep the ordnance. The carrier was operating in the Persian Gulf, supporting ongoing operations against terrorist strongholds. Every day brought new mission requirements, and her team's job was to ensure that the fighter jets and bombers had exactly what they needed to complete their missions successfully and safely. As she supervised the loading of precision-guided munitions onto the ammunition elevator, Maria's mind wandered briefly to the letter she had received from home the previous week. Her younger brother Carlos had finally graduated from community college and was looking for work. Her sister Alina was getting married in the fall. Life moved on in Texas while she spent months at sea, but the Navy had become her second family, and this floating city of 5,000 souls had become her world. The work was demanding and dangerous, but Maria took pride in her expertise. She knew the specifications of every piece of ordnance in the magazine, could troubleshoot loading systems that baffled more senior personnel, and had developed innovative safety procedures that were now used throughout the fleet. Her evaluations consistently rated her among the top performers in her field, and she had been selected for advanced training programs twice. But despite her professional success, Maria carried a weight that had nothing to do with her Navy career. 3 years earlier, during her leave between deployments, she had been driving home from visiting her grandmother when she came upon a horrific accident on a remote stretch of highway. A family's SUV had flipped over and caught fire after colliding with a drunk driver. Without thinking about her own safety, Maria had pulled over and rushed to help. The memories still haunted her sometimes. The sound of twisting metal, the smell of gasoline and smoke, the desperate screams from inside the overturned vehicle. She had managed to pull the father out through a shattered window just as the flames began spreading to the passenger compartment. Then she went back for the mother, who was unconscious and trapped by her seatbelt. The knife from her grandfather's old camping kit, which she still carried in her glove compartment, cut through the belt just in time. The 2 children in the back seat were her biggest challenge. The 6-year-old boy was conscious but terrified, while his 4-year-old sister was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Maria had to crawl halfway into the burning vehicle to reach them, the heat searing her back and arms as she worked to free them from their car seats. She got the boy out first, then went back for the little girl just as the fire department arrived. The entire family survived. The father had a broken leg and some burns, the mother a concussion and internal injuries, but both children recovered completely. The rescue had taken less than 10 minutes from start to finish, but those 10 minutes had changed Maria's life forever. The state of Texas awarded her the Medal of Valor for civilian heroism, one of the highest honors a citizen could receive. She had never told anyone in the Navy about the medal or the rescue. It wasn't that she was ashamed of what she had done, but rather that she didn't want the attention or the questions that would inevitably follow. The Navy had its own heroes, people who performed acts of courage under enemy fire or saved lives in combat situations. What she had done was different, a spur-of-the-moment decision that any decent person would have made. The medal itself was locked away in her small apartment back in Norfolk, wrapped in tissue paper and stored in a box with other personal items she rarely looked at. She wore a small pin version of it sometimes on civilian clothes when she went home on leave, but only because her family was so proud of what she had done. To them, she was a hero twice over, once for serving her country and once for saving that family on the highway. Back in the ammunition compartment, Maria refocused on her work as the elevator returned with empty pallets. The morning flight operations would begin soon, and her team needed to have everything ready for the next cycle of sorties. She moved between her sailors, checking their work, offering guidance, and ensuring that every safety protocol was followed to the letter. "Chief Santos is like a machine," she overheard Seaman Rodriguez telling Williams. "I've never seen her make a mistake or even hesitate. She knows this stuff better than the manuals." Maria smiled slightly at the compliment, though she wasn't actually a chief yet. She had been selected for promotion and would put on the new rank when they returned to port. The advancement meant more responsibility, better pay, and recognition for her years of dedicated service. It also meant that her secret would become even more deeply buried under the routine of military life. The day progressed with its usual rhythm of organized chaos. Aircraft launched and recovered, ordnance was loaded and unloaded, and Maria's team performed their duties with the precision that kept the massive ship functioning smoothly. During her lunch break, she climbed up to one of the catwalks that surrounded the flight deck, watching the endless expanse of blue water that stretched to every horizon. She had been at sea for 3 months on this deployment, with at least 3 more to go before they returned home. The Persian Gulf was nothing like the Texas landscape she had grown up with, but there was something appealing about the vastness of the ocean. Out here, surrounded by water and sky, the problems of the world seemed smaller and more manageable. Her work mattered, her expertise was valued, and she was part of something larger than herself. As she prepared to head back to the ammunition compartment, Maria unconsciously touched the small area on her chest, where she sometimes wore the metal pin when in civilian clothes. Today, like every day aboard the carrier, that space was covered only by her Navy uniform. She had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, her carefully guarded secret would begin to unravel in ways she never could have imagined. The afternoon brought new challenges as weather began moving in from the west. Flight operations would continue, but the increased wind and potential for storms meant that ordnance handling procedures would need to be even more carefully monitored. Maria briefed her team on the additional safety measures, then settled in for what she expected to be another routine day serving aboard one of the most powerful warships in the world. She was wrong about the routine part. Admiral James Mitchell had been commanding naval operations in the Persian Gulf for 8 months, and he made it a point to visit different areas of every ship under his command during his regular inspections. Unlike many flag officers who stuck to the polished spaces where admirals were expected to appear, Mitchell believed in seeing how his sailors actually lived and worked. Today, his schedule included a detailed tour of the Theodore Roosevelt's ammunition handling facilities. The Admiral was a 30-year veteran who had started his career as a surface warfare officer and worked his way up through increasingly challenging commands. He had seen combat in 3 different conflicts and understood that wars were won not just by the courage of pilots and the accuracy of weapons, but by the expertise and dedication of the thousands of sailors who made complex military operations possible. At 52 years old, Admiral Mitchell was known throughout the Navy for his attention to detail and his genuine concern for the welfare of his personnel. He had a reputation for recognizing outstanding performance, especially among the junior enlisted sailors who often did the most dangerous and demanding work with the least recognition. His surprise visits to different parts of his ships were legendary, as was his ability to remember names and faces of personnel he had met only once. Maria was supervising the loading of air-to-ground missiles when word came down that the Admiral was touring their spaces. She quickly ensured that her area was inspection-ready, though Admiral Mitchell's visits were known to focus more on operational efficiency than on spit and polish. Her team snapped to attention as the small group of officers made their way through the narrow passageways of the ammunition storage area. "Petty Officer Santos," Admiral Mitchell said, reading her name tape. "How long have you been working ordnance handling?" 8 years, sir," Maria replied crisply. 4 deployments all on carriers." The Admiral nodded, clearly impressed. "That's substantial experience. What's your assessment of the new guided missile variants we're deploying on this operation?" Maria's answer was detailed and technical, covering everything from loading procedures to reliability statistics. Admiral Mitchell listened carefully, occasionally asking follow-up questions that demonstrated his own deep understanding of weapons systems. It was clear that this was not a ceremonial visit, but a genuine assessment of capabilities and readiness. As they talked, Maria found herself relaxing slightly. The Admiral's questions were challenging but fair, and his obvious respect for technical expertise made the conversation feel more like a professional consultation than a formal inspection. She explained some of the procedural improvements her team had implemented and discussed the training challenges they faced with new personnel. "Outstanding work, Petty Officer Santos," Admiral Mitchell said finally. "Your expertise is clearly a major asset to this operation." The inspection group was preparing to move on when a sudden movement of the ship, caused by the worsening weather conditions, sent several loose items sliding across the deck. Maria instinctively stepped forward to secure a piece of equipment, and as she did so, the top buttons of her uniform shirt pulled slightly apart. Admiral Mitchell's keen eyes caught a brief glimpse of something unusual, the edge of what appeared to be a metal ribbon, pinned to the inside of Maria's shirt, where it would normally be completely hidden. It was an odd place to wear any kind of decoration, and the colors he glimpsed were not those of any military award he recognized. The Admiral's extensive experience with military honors and decorations made the unusual ribbon stand out immediately. For a moment, Admiral Mitchell said nothing, but his trained eye had registered something significant. As the inspection group continued their tour, he found himself wondering what kind of medal a highly competent Navy petty officer would choose to wear hidden from view. In his 3 decades of service, he had seen many unusual situations, but this one intrigued him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maria, unaware that her secret had been partially discovered, continued with her duties as the inspection group moved on to other areas of the ship. She felt good about the interaction with the Admiral and was pleased that her team's professionalism had been recognized at such a high level. As she secured her work area and prepared for the evening shift change, she had no idea that Admiral Mitchell was already making inquiries that would soon change her life aboard the carrier in ways she never could have anticipated. The weather continued to deteriorate as evening approached, and flight operations were temporarily suspended due to high winds and poor visibility. Maria's team secured all ordnance and equipment according to heavy weather protocols, then gathered in the small break area adjacent to their workspace for the evening meal. As they ate and talked about everything from family news to upcoming port calls, Maria felt the familiar satisfaction that came from a job well done and a team that functioned like a well-oiled machine. She had built something here, trained these young sailors, and created procedures that would serve the Navy long after her current assignment ended. It was the kind of legacy that made the long deployments and dangerous work worthwhile. Outside, the storm was building strength, but inside the massive carrier, life continued with the steady rhythm that had characterized naval operations for generations. Maria had no way of knowing that upstairs in Flag Country, Admiral Mitchell was beginning a conversation that would soon bring her carefully guarded secret into the light and change the trajectory of her naval career in ways she never could have imagined. Admiral Mitchell returned to his quarters after the evening briefing, but his mind kept returning to the glimpse of that unusual ribbon on Petty Officer Santos's uniform. In 30 years of military service, he had developed an eye for details that others might miss, and something about the hidden decoration bothered him in a way he couldn't shake. It wasn't the hiding itself that concerned him. Military personnel often kept personal mementos close to their hearts, but the colors he had seen were distinctly civilian in nature. His aide, Commander Sarah Williams, knocked and entered with the evening reports. Williams had served with Admiral Mitchell for 2 years and had learned to recognize when something had captured his attention. The Admiral was known for his thoroughness, and when he fixated on a detail, there was usually a good reason. "Sir, you seem preoccupied," Commander Williams observed as she placed the stack of reports on his desk. "Is there something specific you need me to look into?" Admiral Mitchell leaned back in his chair, considering how to phrase his request. "During today's inspection of the ammunition compartments, I met a Petty Officer Santos. 8 years of ordnance experience, clearly exceptional at her job. But I noticed something unusual, and I'd like you to do some discreet checking on her background." Commander Williams pulled out her tablet, ready to take notes. "What kind of background check, sir? Security clearance issues?" "No, nothing like that," the Admiral replied. "I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a civilian metal ribbon that she was wearing concealed under her uniform. The colors looked like they might be from a state or local government award." I'm curious about what kind of recognition a Navy petty officer might have received from civilian authorities." The commander's eyebrows raised slightly. It was an unusual request, but Admiral Mitchell's instincts about personnel had proven accurate many times before. "I'll reach out to our personnel contacts at Norfolk and see what I can find in her service record. Should I also check with civilian authorities in her home state?" "Start with the service record," Admiral Mitchell said. "If there's nothing there, we can expand the search. And Commander, keep this inquiry discreet. If Petty Officer Santos is keeping something private, I want to respect that unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise." The next morning brought clearer weather and resumed flight operations. Maria's team was back to their regular routine of loading and preparing ordnance for the day's missions. The work was particularly demanding because the previous day's weather delay meant they had to prepare for an increased sortie rate to make up for lost time. As Maria supervised the loading of precision-guided bombs onto an elevator platform, she noticed that several of the ship's administrative personnel had been asking questions about her background and service record. It wasn't unusual for personnel specialists to update records during deployment, but the timing seemed odd, coming just a day after the Admiral's visit. "Hey, Santos," called Petty Officer Martinez from the personnel office as he approached her work area. "I need to verify some information in your service record. Can you confirm your home address and next of kin information?" Maria rattled off the requested information while continuing to monitor her team's work. Martinez made notes on his tablet, then asked, "Have you received any civilian awards or recognition that might not be reflected in your military record? Sometimes people forget to report community service awards, volunteer recognition, that kind of thing." The question hit Maria like a physical blow. Her hands momentarily stilled on the inspection checklist she was holding, and she felt her heart rate increase. After 3 years of successfully keeping her medal secret, was someone finally asking direct questions about it? "No," she replied, hoping her voice sounded casual. "Just the usual military awards and ribbons. Why do you ask?" Martinez shrugged. "Just updating records for the promotion board. Sometimes civilian recognition can add points to your advancement score. You'd be surprised how many sailors forget to report things like volunteer firefighter service or community awards." Maria nodded and turned back to her work, but her mind was racing. The timing of the question, coming so soon after Admiral Mitchell's visit, couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow, someone had discovered her secret, or at least suspected that she was hiding something. 3 decks above, Commander Williams was having a very different kind of morning. Her inquiries into Maria's background had yielded some interesting results. The personnel record showed an exemplary 8-year career with consistently outstanding evaluations, advanced technical training, and leadership positions that indicated high trust from her superiors. But buried in a supplemental file was a single entry that caught her attention. During Maria's last leave period 3 years ago, she had requested extended time off for what was listed as family emergency. The leave had been approved, but there was no additional detail about the nature of the emergency. More significantly, the leave period coincided with what Commander Williams's additional research had revealed. The date when the Texas Medal of Valor had been awarded to one Maria Elena Santos of the same hometown listed in the Navy personnel record. The Texas Medal of Valor was the state's highest civilian award for heroism, typically reserved for law enforcement officers, firefighters, or civilians who risked their lives to save others under extraordinary circumstances. Commander Williams's follow-up call to the Texas Department of Public Safety had provided the full story. Petty Officer Santos had single-handedly rescued a family of 4 from a burning vehicle on a remote highway, suffering second-degree burns on her back and arms in the process. The rescue had made local and state news at the time, with Maria being photographed receiving the medal from the Texas governor at a ceremony in Austin. According to the news reports, she had downplayed her actions and expressed reluctance to be called a hero, saying that anyone would have done the same thing under the circumstances. Commander Williams read through the reports twice, feeling a growing sense of amazement. The young woman they had met in the ammunition compartment wasn't just an expert ordnance handler. She was a genuine hero who had risked her life to save complete strangers. The question was why she had never reported the award through official channels, and why she was apparently keeping it secret from her Navy colleagues. When she briefed Admiral Mitchell on her findings an hour later, his reaction was immediate and intense. She pulled an entire family from a burning car and suffered burns doing it. According to the Texas DPS report, she sustained second-degree burns on her back and arms, plus smoke inhalation, Commander Williams confirmed. The family's vehicle had flipped and caught fire after being hit by a drunk driver. The father later told reporters that they would all have died if Petty Officer Santos hadn't acted so quickly. Admiral Mitchell stood up and walked to the small porthole in his quarters, looking out at the flight deck where aircraft were launching for morning missions. Why wouldn't she report something like that? The Medal of Valor is a significant honor, and it certainly wouldn't hurt her advancement opportunities. I've been thinking about that, sir, Commander Williams replied. From what I can tell about her personality and her service record, she's someone who prefers to let her work speak for itself. She might view the civilian award as separate from her military service, or she might simply be modest about it. The Admiral turned back to his aide. Or she might be worried that people would treat her differently if they knew about it. Sometimes outstanding people prefer to blend in rather than stand out. Over the next several hours, Admiral Mitchell found himself thinking about Maria's situation from multiple angles. As a flag officer, he understood the importance of recognizing and promoting exceptional personnel. The Navy needed leaders who demonstrated courage and quick thinking under pressure, exactly the qualities Maria had displayed during the highway rescue. But he also understood the value of respecting a person's privacy, and their right to keep personal achievements private if they chose to do so. The more he thought about it, the more Admiral Mitchell realized that Maria's decision to keep the medal secret actually told him something important about her character. She wasn't seeking recognition or advancement based on a single dramatic incident. Instead, she was building her reputation through consistent professional excellence, earning respect through her expertise and leadership rather than through publicity about her heroic actions. That afternoon, as flight operations continued at their increased pace, Maria found herself growing more nervous about the background inquiries. 2 more administrative personnel had approached her with questions that seemed designed to uncover information about civilian awards or recognition. Each time, she had managed to deflect the questions, but she was beginning to feel like a mouse being stalked by a very patient cat. During her dinner break, she called her sister Alina from one of the ship's communication centers. It was early morning in Texas, and Alina was getting ready for work at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade. Maria, it's so good to hear from you, Alina's voice crackled through the satellite connection. How's everything going out there? It's fine, Maria replied, then hesitated. Alina, I need to ask you something. Has anyone been calling home asking questions about me? Government people or researchers or anybody like that? No, why would they? Alina sounded puzzled. Is everything okay? You sound worried. Maria chose her words carefully. I think someone on the ship might have found out about the medal. You know, the one from Texas. People have been asking questions about civilian awards and background stuff. Alina was quiet for a moment, then said, Maria, I've never understood why you keep that secret. What you did was amazing, and you should be proud of it. Why does it matter if your Navy friends know about it? It's complicated, Maria replied. I just don't want people to treat me differently or think I'm looking for special attention. I've worked hard to earn respect through my job, and I don't want that to change. But what you did on that highway, that's part of who you are, Alina insisted. It shows the same courage and quick thinking that makes you good at your Navy job. Maybe it's time to stop hiding it. After the call ended, Maria walked slowly back to her work area, thinking about her sister's words. Alina had always been the more outgoing of the 2 sisters, comfortable with attention and recognition in ways that Maria never had been. But maybe there was truth in what she had said. Maybe the qualities that had driven Maria to risk her life for strangers were the same ones that made her effective in her military role. As the evening shift began, Maria threw herself into her work with even more intensity than usual. Her team was preparing ordnance for a complex night mission, and the precision required helped focus her mind on immediate tasks rather than on her growing anxiety about the background investigations. She was checking the arming sequences on a rack of missiles when Seaman Rodriguez approached her with a concerned expression. Chief, there's a message for you to report to the administrative office when you get a chance. They said it wasn't urgent, but they needed to speak with you before the end of your shift. Maria's stomach tightened. The administrative office was where personnel issues were handled, where awards were processed, and where sailors were called to account for discrepancies in their records. She finished her current task, briefed her senior petty officer on the remaining work, and made her way through the ship's narrow corridors to the administrative spaces. The personnel specialist who met her was Petty Officer First Class Johnson, a career administrator who had served on multiple ships and had a reputation for thoroughness. Johnson's expression was neutral but professional as he invited Maria to sit down in the small office. Petty Officer Santos, we're conducting routine record reviews for upcoming promotion boards, and we've discovered what appears to be an incomplete entry in your background file, Johnson began. Specifically, we have record of extended leave you took 3 years ago for a family emergency, but no details about the nature of that emergency or any follow-up documentation. Maria's mouth felt dry as she considered her response. It was a personal matter, Petty Officer Johnson. I don't recall any requirement to provide details beyond the initial leave request. Johnson consulted his computer screen, then looked back at Maria. Normally you'd be correct, but in this case, our research has indicated that you may have received civilian recognition during that time period that should be reflected in your official record. The Navy encourages personnel to report all awards and recognition, as they can impact advancement opportunities and duty assignments. The moment Maria had been dreading for 3 years had finally arrived. Someone had connected the dots between her leave period and the medal ceremony in Texas. Her carefully maintained secret was about to become public knowledge, whether she wanted it to or not. Petty Officer Johnson, she said quietly, I'd like to request permission to speak with my chain of command before providing any additional information about my leave period or any civilian activities during that time. Johnson nodded understandingly. That's your right, Santos, but I should let you know that this inquiry came down from flag level. Admiral Mitchell's staff is specifically interested in ensuring that all personnel records are complete and accurate. Maria felt a chill run through her. Admiral Mitchell himself was involved in the investigation. The Admiral who had seemed so impressed with her technical expertise was now personally looking into her background. She wondered if her secret, once revealed, would change his opinion of her professional capabilities. As she walked back to her work area, Maria realized that her 3-year effort to separate her civilian heroism from her military service was about to come to an end. The question now was whether revealing the truth would help or hurt her career, and whether she could find a way to control how the information was shared with her shipmates. The night shift was beginning as Maria returned to the ammunition compartment, but her mind was no longer fully focused on the technical demands of her job. Somewhere above her in the ship's command spaces, Admiral Mitchell and his staff were piecing together the story of her actions on a Texas highway 3 years ago. By tomorrow, her secret would likely be secret no more. What happened next would determine not just how her current deployment proceeded, but potentially the entire future direction of her naval career. Maria had always believed that actions spoke louder than words, but she was about to discover that sometimes the most important actions are the ones that people don't know about until circumstances force them into the light. The next morning brought an unexpected summons. Maria was conducting the daily safety briefing for her ammunition handling team when Seaman Williams approached with a message that made her stomach drop. She was to report to Admiral Mitchell's quarters at 1100 hours for what was described as an informal discussion. Admiral's quarters were in what sailors called flag country, the most exclusive and rarely visited section of the ship. Most enlisted personnel served entire careers without setting foot in these spaces, much less being invited for personal meetings with flag officers. As Maria made her way through the progressively more polished corridors leading to the Admiral's quarters, she tried to prepare herself for what was likely to be the most important conversation of her naval career. Commander Williams met her at the entrance to the Admiral's office suite and gestured for her to take a seat in a small waiting area. The Admiral will see you shortly, Petty Officer Santos. Can I get you some coffee while you wait? Maria declined the coffee, knowing that her nervous stomach wouldn't handle caffeine well at the moment. She sat rigidly in the comfortable chair, reviewing in her mind the events of the highway rescue and trying to anticipate what questions the Admiral might ask. After 3 years of keeping the incident private, she found it difficult to imagine discussing it with anyone, much less a flag officer she barely knew. Petty Officer Santos, please come in, Admiral Mitchell's voice called from the inner office. Maria entered and came to attention, waiting for permission to sit in the chair positioned across from the Admiral's desk. The office was smaller than she had expected, but elegantly appointed, with charts of the Persian Gulf on the walls and model ships displayed on built-in shelves. "Please have a seat," Admiral Mitchell said, his tone warm but serious. "I want to start by saying that this is not a disciplinary meeting, and you're not in any trouble. I asked to speak with you because my staff has uncovered some information about your background that I'd like to discuss." Maria remained at attention in her chair, unsure how to respond. Admiral Mitchell studied her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "3 years ago, during your leave period, you received the Texas Medal of Valor for rescuing a family from a burning vehicle," he said quietly. "You pulled 4 people to safety, suffering burns and smoke inhalation in the process. Yet this significant act of heroism doesn't appear anywhere in your military record." The words hung in the air between them for a long moment. Maria felt her carefully constructed privacy crumbling away, but also experienced an unexpected sense of relief. After 3 years of hiding, someone finally knew the truth. "Yes, sir," she replied simply. "That's accurate." Admiral Mitchell waited for her to elaborate, but when she didn't continue, he asked, "Can you help me understand why you chose not to report this recognition through official channels? The Medal of Valor is a significant honor that would certainly enhance your service record." Maria struggled with how to explain feelings and motivations that she had never fully articulated, even to herself. "Sir, what happened on that highway was separate from my Navy service. I didn't want people to treat me differently or think I was looking for special consideration based on something that had nothing to do with my military duties." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. "You were concerned that people might judge your professional capabilities based on a civilian action rather than on your actual job performance." "Yes, sir. I've worked hard to earn respect through my expertise and leadership. I didn't want that to be overshadowed by a single incident, even if people viewed it positively." Admiral Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly processing her explanation. "Petty Officer Santos, in my 30 years of military service, I've learned that character and competence aren't separate qualities. They're interconnected. The same judgment, courage, and selflessness that drove you to risk your life for strangers are exactly the qualities that make you exceptional at your current job." Maria felt uncomfortable with the praise, but recognized the truth in what the Admiral was saying. The split-second decision-making that had saved the family on the highway was similar to the quick thinking required when handling dangerous ordnance under pressure. The willingness to put others' safety before her own comfort was a daily part of her responsibilities aboard the carrier. "Sir, I've always tried to keep my personal life and my military service separate," she said. "I didn't see how one related to the other." Admiral Mitchell stood up and walked to one of the charts on his wall, studying it for a moment before turning back to Maria. "Let me share something with you. Early in my career, I was a young lieutenant serving on a destroyer in the Pacific. We responded to a distress call from a civilian yacht that had lost power in heavy seas. The rescue operation required someone to go into the water in dangerous conditions to secure a line to the yacht." He paused, remembering. "I volunteered for the water entry not because I was particularly brave, but because I was the strongest swimmer on the ship and I felt it was my responsibility. The rescue was successful, but I never thought much about it afterward. It was just part of the job." Admiral Mitchell returned to his seat. "Years later, when I was being considered for my first command, that incident appeared in my fitness report as an example of leadership under pressure. My commanding officer had recognized that my willingness to take personal risks to complete the mission was exactly the kind of judgment the Navy needed in its leaders." Maria listened intently, beginning to understand where the conversation was heading. "Your actions on that Texas highway demonstrate the same qualities we need in our senior enlisted personnel," Admiral Mitchell continued. "Quick assessment of dangerous situations, willingness to act decisively under pressure, and absolute commitment to preserving life. These aren't civilian virtues or military virtues. They're leadership virtues." The Admiral reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. "I've been reviewing your service record in detail, and your professional performance is outstanding. You've been selected for advancement to Chief Petty Officer. Your technical evaluations are among the best in the fleet, and your leadership of junior personnel is exemplary." Maria felt a surge of pride at the recognition, but also growing anxiety about where the conversation might be leading. "However," Admiral Mitchell continued, "I believe you're capable of much more than technical excellence, as impressive as that is. The Navy needs leaders who can make difficult decisions under pressure and who understand that our mission ultimately comes down to protecting and serving others. He opened the folder and showed her several documents. I'm recommending you for immediate transfer to the Chief Petty Officer Academy upon completion of this deployment. From there, I'm also recommending you for the Navy's Advanced Leadership Program that prepares outstanding enlisted personnel for senior positions throughout the fleet. Maria's eyes widened in surprise. These were career opportunities that typically took years longer to achieve if they were offered at all. The Advanced Leadership Program was particularly selective, accepting only a handful of personnel each year from the entire Navy. Sir, I'm honored by the recommendation, but I'm not sure I understand why my civilian award would influence military advancement opportunities. Admiral Mitchell smiled slightly. It's not the award itself, Petty Officer Santos. It's what the award represents about your character and judgment. The Navy promotes people based on their potential for increased responsibility, and your actions 3 years ago demonstrate potential that goes far beyond technical expertise. He leaned forward again, his expression becoming more serious. But there's another reason I wanted to speak with you today. Your shipmates deserve to know who they're serving alongside. The young sailors you train and lead should understand that technical competence and personal courage go hand in hand. Maria felt her stomach tighten again. Sir, are you ordering me to make my civilian award public? I'm not ordering anything, Admiral Mitchell replied. But I am strongly encouraging you to reconsider your decision to keep this recognition private. Your example could inspire other sailors to higher levels of service, and your story could help people understand what it really means to live up to the Navy's core values. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Admiral Mitchell sharing more details about the advancement opportunities. He was proposing and explaining how Maria's background would fit into the Navy's broader leadership development programs. When she finally left his quarters, Maria's mind was spinning with possibilities she had never seriously considered. As she made her way back to the ammunition compartment, Maria found herself viewing her work environment with different eyes. The young sailors she supervised did look up to her for guidance that went beyond technical instruction. They watched how she handled pressure, how she made decisions, and how she balanced mission requirements with personnel welfare. Whether she admitted it or not, she was already serving as a role model and leader. The afternoon brought its usual demands of flight operations and ordnance handling, but Maria found it difficult to concentrate fully on routine tasks. Admiral Mitchell's words kept echoing in her mind, particularly his suggestion that her civilian heroism and military service were connected rather than separate aspects of her life. During the dinner break, she called her family again, this time reaching her brother Carlos, who was working the evening shift at a local manufacturing plant. Carlos, I need some advice, she began after they had exchanged the usual updates about family and work. Sure, what's going on? Maria took a deep breath. Someone here found out about the medal from Texas. The Admiral wants me to make it public knowledge and thinks it could help my career, but I've worked so hard to keep it separate from my Navy service. Carlos was quiet for a moment. Maria, do you remember what you told me after the accident? You said that you didn't think about the danger or the consequences. You just saw people who needed help and you helped them. Yes, I remember. Well, isn't that exactly what you do every day in the Navy? You see what needs to be done and you do it, regardless of whether it's easy or dangerous or convenient. The medal didn't make you a hero, Maria. It just recognized what was already there. After the call, Maria returned to her work area where her evening shift was preparing ordnance for night operations. As she supervised the loading procedures and answered technical questions from her junior sailors, she began to see her role differently. These young men and women weren't just learning about ammunition handling. They were learning about responsibility, attention to detail, and the importance of putting mission and crew safety above personal comfort. Seaman Rodriguez approached her with a question about loading sequences, but after she had answered it, he lingered nearby. Chief, can I ask you something personal? He said quietly. Maria nodded, though she felt a familiar tension about where personal questions might lead. You've been doing this job for 8 years, but you still care about every detail like it's your first day. Most people get complacent after a while, but you never seem to. What keeps you so focused? Maria considered the question carefully. Rodriguez, in our line of work, complacency kills people. Every missile we load, every bomb we prepare, every safety check we perform could be the difference between a successful mission and a disaster. The pilots who fly those aircraft trust us to give them reliable weapons, and their lives depend on our expertise. Rodriguez nodded understanding. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's like you take everything personally, like every person on this ship is your responsibility. The observation struck Maria deeply because it was more accurate than she had realized. She did feel personally responsible for the safety and effectiveness of everyone around her, from the newest seaman to the pilots launching from the flight deck above. It was the same instinct that had driven her to risk her life for strangers on a Texas highway. Rodriguez, when you put on this uniform, you accept responsibility for something bigger than yourself, she said finally. Every decision you make, every procedure you follow, every time you choose excellence over convenience, you're serving something important. That's not something you can turn on and off based on how you feel on a particular day. As the evening progressed, Maria realized that Admiral Mitchell had been right about the connection between her civilian heroism and her military service. The values that had driven her to rescue the family were the same ones that made her effective as a naval leader. Trying to separate them had been artificial and ultimately counterproductive. The question now was whether she was ready to acknowledge that connection publicly and accept the career opportunities and responsibilities that might come with it. For the first time in 3 years, Maria began to consider the possibility that her secret might be worth sharing, not for recognition or advancement, but as an example of what it meant to serve others regardless of the personal cost. That night, as she prepared for sleep in her small berthing compartment, Maria made a decision that would change the trajectory of her naval career and her life. Tomorrow, she would ask to speak with Admiral Mitchell again, and this time, she would be ready to discuss not just what had happened on that Texas highway, but what it meant for her future service to the Navy and her country. The storm that had been building inside her for 3 years was finally about to break, but for the first time, Maria welcomed the possibility of clear skies ahead. Maria barely slept that night. She lay in her narrow bunk listening to the familiar sounds of the ship cutting through the water and the distant rumble of machinery that never stopped aboard a carrier. Her mind kept cycling through the conversation with Admiral Mitchell and the decision she had made to reveal her secret. After 3 years of careful concealment, the prospect of openness felt both terrifying and liberating. At 500, she gave up trying to sleep and made her way to the small gym facilities available to enlisted personnel. The early morning hours before her shift began were usually her quiet time, but today she needed the physical release of exercise to calm her anxious energy. As she worked through her routine on the weight machines, Maria practiced the words she would use when she contacted Admiral Mitchell's office. The morning shift began with the usual bustle of flight operations preparation. Maria's team was responsible for loading ordnance for a complex strike package that would involve both Navy and Air Force aircraft operating from different bases throughout the region. The coordination required for such operations was immense, and Maria found some comfort in losing herself in the familiar technical challenges. "Chief, you seem different today," observed Petty Officer Thompson, one of her most experienced team members. "Everything okay?" Maria realized that her internal turmoil was showing more than she had intended. "Just thinking through some career decisions, Thompson. Nothing that affects our work here." But that wasn't entirely true. As the morning progressed, Maria found herself paying closer attention to her interactions with the junior sailors on her team. She watched how they responded to her guidance, how they looked to her for leadership during stressful moments, and how they emulated her approach to safety and precision. Admiral Mitchell had been right about her role as an example to others, whether she acknowledged it or not. At 10:30, during a brief lull in operations, Maria made the call to Admiral Mitchell's office. Commander Williams answered and seemed pleased to hear from her. "Petty Officer Santos, the Admiral mentioned that you might want to continue yesterday's conversation. He has time this afternoon at 1500 if that works with your duty schedule." Maria confirmed the appointment, then spent the rest of her morning shift thinking about how to structure what she wanted to say. She had always been more comfortable with actions than with words, but this conversation would require her to articulate feelings and motivations that she had never fully examined. At 1500, she found herself once again in Admiral Mitchell's quarters, but this time her nervousness was mixed with determination. The Admiral greeted her warmly and invited her to sit in the same chair she had occupied the previous day. "I appreciate you reaching out, Petty Officer Santos. I hope you've had time to think about our discussion yesterday." "Yes, sir, I have," Maria replied. "I wanted to tell you that you were right about the connection between what happened in Texas and my Navy service. I've been trying to keep them separate, but that was a mistake." Admiral Mitchell nodded encouragingly. "What changed your mind?" Maria had rehearsed this part of the conversation, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself speaking from the heart rather than from her prepared script. "Last night, one of my sailors asked me why I still care about every detail after 8 years of doing this job. When I answered him, I realized that I was describing the same values that made me stop on that highway 3 years ago." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I think I was afraid that people would see the civilian award as the most important thing about me, instead of my Navy service. But now, I understand that they're both part of the same commitment to serving others." Admiral Mitchell smiled. "That's exactly the kind of insight that makes someone ready for increased leadership responsibilities. Are you prepared to accept the advancement opportunities we discussed yesterday?" "Yes, sir, but I want to earn them through my continued performance, not just because of what happened in Texas." "Petty Officer Santos, let me be clear about something," Admiral Mitchell said firmly. "The recommendations I'm making are based primarily on your outstanding service record and your demonstrated leadership potential. The civilian award simply confirms what your Navy performance already indicated about your character." He opened a folder on his desk. "I've already submitted the paperwork for your immediate advancement to Chief Petty Officer and your selection for the Advanced Leadership Program. But there's something else I'd like to discuss with you." Maria waited, wondering what additional surprises the conversation might hold. "Next month, we'll be hosting a delegation of senior military officials from several allied nations. They're studying how the U.S. Navy develops enlisted leadership. I'd like you to participate in a presentation about the connection between personal values and professional excellence." Maria felt her stomach tighten again. "Sir, what kind of presentation?" "Nothing elaborate," Admiral Mitchell assured her. "Simply sharing your story and explaining how your personal commitment to serving others translates into effective military leadership. It would be an opportunity to represent the best values of the enlisted force to an international audience." The request was both an honor and a challenge. Maria had never spoken to groups of senior officers, much less international delegations. But she recognized that this was part of accepting increased responsibility and leadership roles. "I'd be honored to participate, sir, but I'll need some guidance on what would be appropriate to share." Admiral Mitchell smiled. "Commander Williams will work with you on the presentation structure. The goal is simply to demonstrate how individual character development supports larger military objectives." As the meeting continued, Admiral Mitchell outlined additional opportunities that would be available to Maria as she advanced through the leadership development program. She would attend advanced technical schools, serve in various fleet assignments to broaden her experience, and eventually be considered for senior enlisted positions that carried significant responsibility throughout the Navy. When she left the Admiral's quarters an hour later, Maria's head was spinning with possibilities she had never seriously considered. The careful boundaries she had maintained between her personal and professional life were dissolving, but instead of feeling exposed, she felt energized by the prospect of integrating all aspects of her service into a more unified sense of purpose. That evening, Maria gathered her team for their regular end-of-shift briefing. After reviewing the day's operations and discussing the next day's schedule, she found herself addressing them differently than she had before. "Before we secure for the evening, I want to talk to you about something that goes beyond our technical responsibilities," she began. The sailors looked surprised, as Maria rarely deviated from operational topics during these briefings. "You all know that I expect excellence in everything we do, and you've probably wondered why I'm so focused on details that might seem minor. I want to explain that our work here is about more than just loading weapons and following procedures." She gestured toward the flight deck above them. "Every pilot who launches from this carrier trusts us with their life. Every mission we support depends on our expertise and attention to detail. But beyond that, we're part of something larger than ourselves, something that requires us to be better than we might be if we were just looking out for our own interests." The sailors listened intently, recognizing that their chief was sharing something important. 3 years ago, before some of you joined the Navy, I was driving home during leave when I came across a serious car accident, Maria continued. A family's vehicle had flipped and caught fire, and they were trapped inside. I had to make a split-second decision about whether to risk my own safety to help strangers. She could see the surprise on their faces as they realized she was sharing something deeply personal. I didn't think about the danger or the potential consequences. I just saw people who needed help, and I helped them. That's the same instinct that should guide everything we do here. When we see a safety hazard, we address it immediately. When we spot a potential equipment failure, we fix it before it becomes a problem. When a shipmate needs guidance, we provide it. Seaman Rodriguez raised his hand tentatively. Chief, did the family survive? Yes, they all survived, Maria replied. The state of Texas gave me a medal for the rescue, but I've never talked about it because I wanted you to respect my leadership based on my Navy performance, not on something that happened in civilian life. Petty Officer Thompson spoke up. Chief, with respect, the fact that you would risk your life for strangers just proves what we already knew about your character. You do the same thing for us every day, making sure we're safe and properly trained. The comment sparked a discussion among the sailors about the connection between personal values and professional performance. Maria listened as they shared their own stories about why they had joined the Navy and what motivated them to excel in their duties. She realized that her reluctance to share her background had actually created artificial barriers between herself and the people she was supposed to be leading. After the sailors dispersed to their evening activities, Maria remained in the work area, updating maintenance logs and preparing for the next day's operations. But her mind kept returning to the conversation with her team and the positive response to her decision to share her story. Petty Officer Thompson returned about an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the mess deck. Chief, I wanted to thank you for trusting us with your story tonight, he said, offering her one of the cups. I've been in the Navy for 5 years, and I've served under a lot of different supervisors. Most of them talk about Navy values like honor, courage, and commitment as abstract concepts. You're the first person I've worked for who actually lives those values in a way that makes sense to me. Maria accepted the coffee gratefully. Thompson, I'm still learning how to balance personal privacy with leadership responsibilities. Tonight felt like the right time to start being more open about why this work matters to me. Can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Thompson said. If you hadn't told us about the medal tonight, would we have found out some other way? People have been asking a lot of questions about your background lately. Maria smiled ruefully. Admiral Mitchell discovered my secret and helped me understand that I was trying to separate things that shouldn't be separated. I probably should have been more open from the beginning, but I was worried about how people would react. Thompson nodded understanding. Chief, speaking for the team, we already knew you were special. The medal just explains why we felt that way. You've never asked us to do anything you wouldn't do yourself, and you've never put convenience ahead of safety or mission requirements. That's leadership, regardless of what awards you've received. As Thompson left for the evening, Maria reflected on how much her perspective had changed in just 24 hours. The secret she had guarded so carefully was turning out to be less important than the values and actions it represented. Her team's positive response to her story suggested that authenticity and openness were more powerful leadership tools than the careful privacy she had maintained. The next several days brought a whirlwind of activity as word of Maria's background spread throughout the ship. The story of the Texas highway rescue resonated with sailors throughout the carrier, but rather than changing how they viewed her professional capabilities, it seemed to reinforce their existing respect for her leadership. Senior officers began seeking her input on training programs and safety procedures, recognizing that her commitment to preserving life extended far beyond her specific technical responsibilities. Junior officers asked her advice about leading enlisted personnel, understanding that her example of personal courage translated directly into effective military leadership. Most importantly to Maria, her relationship with her own team strengthened as they understood more clearly why she approached her duties with such intensity and care. The artificial barriers between her personal values and professional responsibilities had finally dissolved, creating space for a more integrated and effective leadership style. As the carrier continued its operations in the Persian Gulf, Maria began preparing for the presentation to the international military delegation. Working with Commander Williams, she developed a framework for discussing how individual character development supported larger organizational objectives. The presentation would represent not just her personal story, but the Navy's broader commitment to developing leaders who understood that technical competence and moral courage were inseparable aspects of effective service. For the first time in 3 years, Maria felt that all aspects of her life were pointing in the same direction. The highway rescue in Texas had been the beginning of a journey toward understanding what it meant to serve others, and her Navy career was providing the platform for living out that commitment on a larger scale. The secret was finally out, and instead of the negative consequences she had feared, Maria discovered that authenticity and integration were far more powerful than the careful compartmentalization she had maintained. As she prepared for the next phase of her career, she understood that the best leaders were those who brought their whole selves to their service, holding nothing back in their commitment to something larger than their own interests. 6 weeks later, Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos stood before an audience of international military officers in the carrier's main briefing room. The promotion to chief had been officially confirmed, and the new anchors on her collar felt both familiar and transformative. She wore her Texas Medal of Valor pin alongside her military ribbons, no longer hiding the civilian recognition that had become an integral part of her leadership story. The international delegation included senior enlisted leaders from 12 allied nations, all of whom were studying American methods for developing military leadership. Admiral Mitchell had introduced Maria as an example of how individual character and professional excellence reinforced each other, creating leaders who could be trusted with increasing levels of responsibility. Chief Santos will share with you today how personal values translate into effective military leadership, Admiral Mitchell announced. Her story demonstrates the connection between character development and operational effectiveness that defines our enlisted force. Maria approached the podium with confidence that had grown over weeks of preparation, but also with the humility that had always characterized her approach to leadership. She had learned that effective leaders were those who understood both their capabilities and their responsibility to serve something larger than themselves. 3 years ago, I thought my civilian life and my military service were separate things, she began, looking out at the audience of experienced military professionals. I believed that keeping them apart would make me more effective as a sailor. I was wrong about that, and today I want to explain why. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, which showed a photograph of the Texas highway where the accident had occurred. On this stretch of road, I faced a split-second decision that would define how I understood my responsibility to others. A family's vehicle had overturned and caught fire after being struck by a drunk driver. I could have waited for emergency responders, or I could have acted immediately despite the personal risk. The next slide showed newspaper coverage of the rescue, including photographs of the family she had saved and the medal ceremony where she had received the Texas Medal of Valor. I chose to act because waiting meant that people would die. The decision didn't feel heroic at the time. It felt necessary. That distinction has become central to how I understand leadership. Maria advanced to a slide showing her ammunition handling team at work aboard the carrier. Every day in my Navy career, I faced similar decisions about how much effort to invest, how much risk to accept, and how much responsibility to take for other people's safety and success. The values that drove me to risk my life for strangers on that highway are the same ones that guide my approach to military leadership. She spent the next 20 minutes explaining specific examples of how her personal commitment to preserving life translated into daily decisions about training, safety protocols, and personnel development. The international officers asked thoughtful questions about how individual values were reinforced through military culture and how personal character development was integrated with professional training. Commander Nakamura from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force raised his hand during the question period. Chief Santos, many military leaders struggle with balancing personal privacy and professional openness. How do you decide what aspects of your background to share with subordinates? Maria had wrestled with this question throughout her preparation for the presentation. Sir, I learned that authenticity is more important than privacy when it comes to leadership. My subordinates need to understand why I make certain decisions and what values guide my approach to our mission. Hiding important aspects of my background created artificial barriers that made me less effective as a leader. The presentation continued with a discussion of how the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment provided a framework for integrating personal character with professional responsibilities. Maria explained how her understanding of these values had evolved through her experience, moving from abstract concepts to practical guidelines for daily decision-making. After the formal presentation ended, several of the international officers approached Maria with additional questions about career development and leadership training. The conversation reinforced her growing understanding that her story resonated across cultural and military boundaries because it addressed universal questions about service and responsibility. Admiral Mitchell joined the group of officers surrounding Maria after the briefing room had cleared. Outstanding presentation, Chief Santos. You've given our allies a clear example of how we develop leaders who can be trusted with increasing responsibility. Later that afternoon, Maria met with Commander Williams to discuss the next phases of her career development. The Advanced Leadership Program would begin in 6 months, after the carrier returned from deployment, and would include assignments to shore-based training facilities and eventually to different types of ships to broaden her experience. Your presentation today was exactly the kind of leadership example the Navy needs, Commander Williams told her. Admiral Mitchell has been following your progress closely, and he believes you have potential for senior enlisted positions throughout the fleet. Maria felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about the opportunities ahead. The careful boundaries she had maintained for 8 years were completely gone now, replaced by an integrated approach to service that felt both more demanding and more fulfilling. That evening, she gathered her ammunition handling team for what would be one of their last briefings before the carrier began its journey home. Over the past 6 weeks, the dynamic within the group had changed significantly as Maria's leadership style had become more open and authentic. "Chief, we heard your presentation today was a big success," said Petty Officer Thompson. "Word is getting around the ship that you're being considered for some pretty impressive career opportunities." Maria nodded. "The Navy is investing in my professional development, which means higher expectations and more responsibility. But it also means that what we've built here, this team and this approach to our mission, could influence how ordnance handling is done throughout the fleet." The conversation that followed focused on lessons the team had learned during the deployment and how those insights could be applied in future assignments. Maria found herself thinking about legacy in ways she never had before, understanding that effective leaders were those who developed systems and people that continued to excel even after they moved on to new challenges. Seaman Rodriguez, who had grown significantly in confidence and competence over the course of the deployment, raised an important question. "Chief, how do we maintain the standards you've taught us when we're assigned to different ships with different leadership styles?" "Rodriguez, the standards aren't mine," Maria replied. "They're the Navy's standards, and they exist because they work. Your job is to maintain those standards regardless of who's supervising you and to help other sailors understand why excellence matters." She gestured toward the deck above them, where aircraft operations continued around the clock. "Every person on this ship, from the Admiral to the newest seaman, is part of the same mission. Your contribution to that mission should be the best you're capable of giving, not the minimum required to get by." As the evening briefing concluded, Maria realized that her journey from private heroism to public leadership was nearing a transition point. The carrier would return to Norfolk in 3 weeks, where she would begin the advanced training that would prepare her for senior enlisted positions. The team she had built and the relationships she had developed would evolve as everyone moved to new assignments. But the integration of personal values and professional excellence that had defined her growth over the past 2 months would continue to guide her approach to leadership throughout her career. The secret she had guarded so carefully had become the foundation for a more authentic and effective leadership style. Over the next 3 weeks, as the carrier made its way across the Atlantic toward home, Maria found herself increasingly focused on the future rather than on the past. The highway rescue in Texas had been the beginning of understanding what it meant to serve others, but her Navy career was providing the platform for living out that commitment on an increasingly larger scale. The morning of their arrival in Norfolk brought crowds of families to the pier and the familiar chaos of homecoming after a long deployment. Maria's parents and siblings had flown in from Texas to welcome her home, and she looked forward to sharing with them how much her perspective had changed over the past 6 months. As she supervised her team's final equipment inspections and prepared to transfer responsibility to the shore-based maintenance crews, Maria reflected on how completely her life had changed since Admiral Mitchell had first glimpsed her hidden metal. The careful separation she had maintained between her civilian heroism and her military service had given way to an integrated approach that was far more demanding but also more fulfilling. Elena approached her as the family members were allowed aboard the ship for tour and reunions. "Maria, you look different," her sister observed. "More confident somehow, like you figured something out." Maria smiled as she watched her team members reuniting with their own families and beginning to process the experiences of their deployment. "I think I finally understand what it means to be a leader, Elena. It's not about authority or recognition. It's about accepting responsibility for something bigger than yourself and helping other people do the same." As the sun set over Norfolk Naval Base, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos understood that her journey towards senior enlisted leadership was just beginning. The Texas Medal of Valor that she now wore openly represented not just a moment of heroism 3 years earlier, but a commitment to service that would guide her decisions for the rest of her career. The secret was no longer a secret, and the artificial boundaries that had once limited her effectiveness as a leader had been replaced by an authentic integration of character and competence. Admiral Mitchell's discovery of her hidden metal had initiated a transformation that would influence not just her own career, but the careers of countless sailors who would serve under her leadership in the years to come. As she prepared to leave the ship that had been her home for 6 months, Maria carried with her a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve others, and a clearer vision of the leader she was meant to become. The highway in Texas had been the beginning of her story, but the vast ocean of possibilities ahead would determine how that story continued to unfold. The young woman who had once hidden her civilian heroism had become a leader who understood that true service meant holding nothing back in pursuit of excellence, integrity, and the protection of others. The metal that Admiral Mitchell had glimpsed beneath her uniform had revealed not just a secret, but a calling that would define the rest of her life in service to her country and her fellow sailors. In the years to come, as Chief Santos advanced through increasingly senior positions throughout the Navy, her story would become part of the institution's larger narrative about how character and competence combined to create leaders worthy of the responsibility they carried. The secret that had once seemed like a burden had become the foundation for a legacy that would influence military leadership long after her own service ended. The carrier's homecoming marked not an ending, but a transformation from private heroism to public leadership, from hidden service to open commitment, and from individual excellence to institutional influence. Maria Santos had finally learned that the best way to honor her past actions was to ensure that her future service lived up to the same standards of courage, selflessness, and unwavering dedication to protecting others. The metal beneath her uniform had been discovered, but the values it represented would guide her decisions for decades to come, influencing countless lives and shaping the Navy's commitment to developing leaders who understood that character and competence were inseparable aspects of effective service.